Now we're going to be talking about Herzberg and the two-factor theory. Now, Herzberg believed that we have two factors inside of us that actually sets the motivation. The first one is called hygiene factors. Now, I'll show you this. The hygiene factors actually consist of working conditions, salary, status, security, policy and administration, relationship, personal life. All of these is considered hygiene factors. Now, the second factor that Herzberg based his theory upon was were achievement, recognition for achievement, interest in the job, responsibility for tasks, advancement to higher level tasks, personal growth. Now, Harrisburg stated that if a company has these two factors, the hygiene and motivation factors, they can actually provide, they can actually have motivation or provide motivation to their staff. But having only one of them, like let's say the company only has hygiene factors, then they don't have motivated staff. But if they have only motivation factors as well, they don't have motivated staff. They need to have both factors, okay? Now, let's talk about some consequences of Herzberg theory. So number one, pay and working condition can be improved, and these will help to remove dissatisfaction, but they will not, on their own, provide conditions for motivation to exist. It's exactly as what Herzberg stated. Having only one type of factor, not only having one type of factor is enough, but having several hygiene factors and several motivation factors is quite important. Now, then, Erzberg argued that it was not possible to encourage someone to do a job by paying them. Okay? So basically, you can't just pay someone and he does the job. You need to give him extra incentives. Okay? Now, motivation to do the job and to do it well would only exist. A motivator where in place is basically repeating what I just explained to you in a bit. Okay? And so is this. Now, I want to talk about a concept that's called job enrichment, which we're going to be talking about more detailed in a bit. Job enrichment basically it aims to use the full sorry the full capabilities of workers by giving them the opportunity to do more challenging and fulfilling work. So basically, let's say I'm a teacher, so they can let's say, and instead of just giving me um, business management classes, they can give me business management classes along with economy classes. Why is that? Simply because they want to enrich the job that I have right now. Okay? Now, moving on, also, we have a business could offer higher pay, improving working condition, and less heavy-handed supervision of work. Again, it's exactly what I've been explaining of it. Okay? Now, let's evaluate Herzberg's work. It says team working is now much more widespread, with whole units of work being delegated to these groups, which actually suppress that. Yes, his theory is actually correct. Workers tend to be much more responsible for the quality of their own work rather than being closely supervised by a quality controlling inspectorate. And most firms are continually looking for ways to improve effective communication, and group meetings allowing two-way communication are often favored. So basically, what we're trying to say here is Herzberg work is actually not bad at all. Some of the things that he mentioned in his theory as quite are quite make sense basically. Having these two factors in one company can benefit the company and can have more motivated employees. Now moving on to Adams and equity theory. So Adam has something that's called equity theory, and it's basically, you know, treating employees fairly, treating employees in an equal way. Okay, what do I mean by that? So, in the equity theory, we have three conditions. Number one, equity. And when I say what do I mean by equity, which means the input that I'm putting in equals the outcomes that I'm getting. Okay? So um, let's say, let's say Ali and Ibrahim are working in the same company. Okay? Now, Ali is an accountant, Ibrahim is an accountant. Ali is working 8 hours a day, Ibrahim is working 8 hours a day. They're both getting the same salary. This is equity condition. Now, when it comes to underpayment condition, in this case, Ali is an accountant, Ibrahim is an accountant. Ali is working, let's say, Ali is working 10 hours a day, Ibrahim is working 8 hours a day, but Ali is getting less than Ibrahim. Although Ali is contributing more, Ibrahim is he's still getting less than Ibrahim. This is what we mean by underpayment equity. Now, the third case is where Ali is working 8 hours, Ibrahim is working 10 hours, but Ali is getting more pay than Ibrahim, although he's doing less work than him. This is overpayment equity. So, this is what we mean by equity theory. Okay? Um, Now, let's move to Daniel Pink theory. Daniel Pink theory, basically, he stated that to have an employee, for employees to motivate, usually employees have three factors: autonomy, purpose, and mastery. Now, what do we mean by autonomy? Autonomy is basically you or a person being in control. Okay, a person being in control, taking his own decisions, and so on. This is what we mean by autonomy. It's like self direction, and that's one of the things that actually help the employee, motivate himself by himself, because he already wants to have in control, to be in control. He's motivating himself by himself. Now the second one is mastery. It's basically the desire to continually improve at something that matter, which means master something, being able to master something, being good at, being the best at that thing. The theories say that we have this inside of us already. Okay. So giving employees the opportunity to master themselves and to be better would actually motivate them. And then we have purpose. The third factor, purpose is basically when you have it's basically, it's like the desire to do things in service of something larger than ourselves, which simply means having a purpose to work with. Like if you give your employee a vision, okay, if you give your employee a vision, if you tell them that you want to do this and that, you'd see them more motivated than just letting them work without having a goal, without having a purpose to do so. Okay. Now, let's move on to the most common. I'm sorry. Before we move on to the most common basic systems, I just want to go through most of the things that we talked about right now. We mentioned since the beginning, we talked about different theories, okay? Talked about different motivations theory. The first one was Taylor and scientific management. The second one was Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. The third one was Herzberg's and two-factor theory. The basically the fourth one was Adam and equity theory. The fifth one was Daniel Pink theory. I need you as a student to understand these five theories and understand how we can actually apply them to our real life, how the companies are actually applying them. Okay. At the same time, I'd like to say that each researcher had made his statement regarding his theories and stated why his theory is better or not. I'm not gonna say that one theory is better than the other. I'm not gonna say that. But at the end of the day, every theory suits a different type of company. Okay. Now let's move to the most common payment system. Okay. Now we have talked about we have two types of motivation that I'd like you to know. We have non-financial motivation and financial motivation, and I think it's explaining itself by itself. When we say non-financial motivation, we're talking about um, intrinsic factor that we have mentioned before at the beginning of the lesson. And when we're talking about financial motivation, we're talking about extrinsic factors, okay? Now let's check the most common payment system. What do you mean by that? We're talking about financial motivation, financial incentives. We're talking about extrinsic incentives here. Now we have different, I'm just going to go through them. I listed the definitions here. I'm just going to go through them and then we're going to go through them more detail. Hourly wage rate. What do I mean by hourly wage rate? Basically, the employee is paid based on the amount of hours he's working. Piece rate, the employee is paid based on the amount of unit he's producing. What do I mean by unit? I mean the amount of, how many pieces he's producing. Salary is basically an annual monthly income or an annual income. Okay. Um, Commission is basically the payment you make to salesperson for each sale made, and as I said, we're going to talk about this more detailed in a bit. Performance related pay is a bonus scheme to reward the staff for above average work performance. Profit related pay is basically they're paying employees based on the profit that the company is getting. Okay, fringe benefits is things like health insurance, life insurance, paid vacation, all these extra things that you get when you work. And employee share ownership scheme is, and instead of paying them money, the company just gives them shares. And I think we talked about what is shares, what are shares, and what are stocks. Now, let's talk about the first type, which is a salary. Okay, it's the most common form of payment. I'm sure each and every one of you are familiar with it. It is paid usually every month, annually, and it's a fixed amount. It usually increases by years and by time. Now, let's take a look at the advantages and disadvantages of salary. Advantages give security of income, give status compared to time rate or piece rate because it's more stable. It's more, aids in costing. Sorry. It's suitable for jobs where output isn't measurable. Suitable for management positions where staff are expected to put in extra time to complete tasks and assignments. Now, if we look at the disadvantages, income is not directly related to effort and productivity level. It may lead to complacency of the salary earner. What do I mean by that? I mean, maybe you'll just, you're getting the salary no matter what you do, and just gonna, slack at your work. You're not gonna do your job that well. A regular appraisal may be needed to assess whether individuals should move up a salary band. Okay. Sometimes we have negative appraisals. We have positive appraisal. What do I mean by appraisal? Which means evaluating the employee. So sometimes, not sometimes, you need to evaluate the employee constantly to make sure that he actually deserves, a salary push. Now, moving on to time-based wage rate. A time-based wage rate, as I mentioned earlier, it's the hourly wage rate. Basically, they pay you based on the hours you work. You work 8 hours, they pay you for 8 hours. You work 9 hours, and so on. Okay. Now, Piece rate payment is they just pay you for each unit produced, as I mentioned. A rate is fixed for the production of each unit. Let's say you're producing 10 bottles an hour. You get paid for each bottle you produce. Let's say you produce 20 bottles an hour. Same thing. So you get paid by that bottle that you have created. Let's take a look at the advantage and disadvantage. The advantage encourages greater effort and faster working. Why? Because the more you produce, the more you get. So you just want to work fast. The labor cost for each unit is determined in advance and helps set a price for the product. So let's say that we pay the employee $1 for every bottle produced. That can help us say, okay, if we pay the employee $1 and the manufacturing price, let's say, is $1, then $2 our expense, so which means we can sell that bottle with more than $2 to get the profit. It really helps. Disadvantages: it requires output to be measured and standardized. Uh, so sometimes it's a bit difficult for each product to just standardize that, to measure how much output they're getting. It may lead to falling quality and safety levels as workers rush to complete units, since employees just seek to finish as much amount of you know uh, products possible. Sometimes the products might not be with good quality, because basically the employee is trying his best to finish. Workers may settle for a certain pay level and won't be motivated to produce more than a certain level. It provides little security over pay level. Why? It's not stable, it's not fixed. Depends on how. Let's say you made one bottle today, you just get that $1. So sometimes, it's not fixed, not stable. Now, commission is basically this. Let's say you are a car seller. The owner tells you, if you sell this car, I'll give you 2% of the car's price. So let's say the car is, or 1%. Let's say the car is, let's say, 100 BD, or let's say 1 million. You get 100. um, because that's the price of the car, and you got 1% commission. Commissions can go up to 10%. So um, that can be quite a good income. Even though, let's say, your salary as a car seller is, let's say, 1000 BD, but you sold 5 cars this month and you received, let's say, 4 or 5,000. On total cars you've sold. So it's basically much, much more than your salary. So commission can be a very good income. Okay. Uh, as I said, it has the same advantages and disadvantages as a piece rate system, and it does not encourage teamwork. Why? Because you have to sell them by yourself. So it might create some, issues with other employees at the job, or some jealousy, or some sensitivities. Now, moving on to performance related pay. Performance related pay, as I mentioned, if you perform higher, you get higher. If you perform lower, you get lower. Okay. Some systems, for example, some places, at the end of the month or at the end of the year, they check your performance. If they give you, let's say, satisfactory, you get an increase of this amount. If you get excellent, you get an increase of more amount, and so on. Now, a performance related pay advantages: staff are motivated to improve performance if they're seeking to increase financial rewards. Target setting can help to give purpose and direction to the work of an individual. Annual appraisal offers the opportunity for feedback on the performance of an individual. If you get evaluated every year, you actually know, what am I doing wrong? How can I improve myself, and so on. Some people might look at this as an opportunity, others might look at it as, you know, not that much of an opportunity. Disadvantage: can fail to motivate if staff are not driven by the need to earn financial rewards. Team spirit can be damaged, definitely. Claims of managers' favoritism may undermine relationship. Why? Because the manager would definitely prefer the seller who's selling much, much more cars than the seller who's not. So less autonomy for workers, as they need to conform to the system that generate bonuses. Okay, so they can't basically do whatever they want or have some control. They have to report, they have to work to get that extra commission. We have other forms of payment which I already talked about. Profit related pay. Okay. Employee share ownership scheme, as I mentioned, they just, instead of giving them salary, they just give them shares, which means they give them ownership of that company. Fringe benefits that I mentioned, company car, free insurance, pension scheme, just extra benefits. I'll take a look at non financial methods of motivation. Okay, so non financial methods of motivation basically involves anything extrinsic factors, let's say, that tackles our intrinsic factors. Basically, we have few. Let's talk about them now. But before we move on to the types of non financial methods, let's take a look at the advantages and disadvantages. The advantages, potential conflict between owners and workers is reduced. Why? Because basically, you have an understanding between each other and you actually reduce the amount of conflict. They are designed to lead to higher worker effort levels and a greater preparation. Um, Basically, they're trying their best. The employee is trying his best to perform better at this company because he's already non financially motivated, and the business is likely to attract better recruits. Why? Because uh, they know that the companies actually treats their employees in a very good way, so that company becomes just more attractive to employees. um, as the bonuses are paid out of profit, the scheme does not add to business cost, unlike a normal increase in pay level. So the company is actually not paying anything. They're not, they're just putting some extra effort, but that does not cost a lot of money, like bonuses or commissions and so on. Successful is increasing motivation, then the schemes could lead to an increase in overall business profitability. If you have employees are absolutely motivated, they're working their best, they're at their best level of productivity. Of course, you're gonna have better, better work, basically more profitability at that business. The disadvantages, the reward offered is not closely related to individual effort. Sometimes only one person is putting the effort, so that might be demotivating for that person to see that he's the only one who's actually trying his best. The schemes can be costly to set up and operate, especially in large firms. In small firms, it might be easy to have non-financial incentives, but in big firms, it's a bit difficult. Small profit shares paid at the end of the financial year are unlikely to promote motivation. Profit sharing schemes will reduce profits available to be paid to owners. Worker share ownership schemes can increase the total number of shares issued and dilute the value of existing shares. Um, okay, now moving on, let's take a look at the meanings of each type of non-financial motivators. These are all types of non-financial motivator, at least the ones that are mentioned in the book. Let's start with job enlargement. What do I mean by job enlargement? Basically, let's take an example. Let's say I'm a teacher, okay? Now, how do I have job enlargement? Okay? Job enlargement, basically, let's say, see, and I'll tell you something. Usually, a lot of students confuse job enlargement with job enrichment. So, I'm going to talk about it and then I'm going to give you an example. Job enlargement is increasing the scope of a job by broadening or deepening the tasks. Okay? But job enrichment, attempting to motivate employees by giving them opportunities to use the full range of their abilities. Okay? So let's say job enlargement is, uh, let's say you're a teacher and you're given extra tasks. Um, let's say me as a business teacher, they're giving me, let's say I have to, for example, enter the grades on my own right now before someone used to help me, or I have to manage setting up the table for my classes, or so they're giving me extra tasks to do. Now, job enrichment is basically they're enriching my job by giving me, let's say, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning, they're giving me another class. They're giving me economy to teach along with business. Okay, so that's basically how they're enriching me. Now, let's move to, before we talk about self production, let's move to job redesign. Job redesign is basically structuring your job. Okay, it's just to for example, me as a business teacher, for example, this might be a type of restructuring, having to teach virtually. It's just restructuring of that, redesigning my job. Job rotation is basically moving employees from one job to another to help them gain more experience. Let's say me as a teacher, they're moving me to be a librarian for a month, or they're moving me again to be a secretary for a month. That's just job rotation. Okay, now, going back to cell production, what do I mean by cell production? It's a lean method producing similar products using cells or group of team members to facilitate operations. Um, it basically, you're facilitating operations, as in dividing operations to be able to produce in a better way, okay, and to save time. So instead, let's say of producing, let's say we want to produce a water bottle, instead of producing it in one, factory, we just have two factories. Let's say one to creating the bottle, one for you know making the water, sweet and everything, and then one for assembling that. Let's talk about teamworking. Teamworking production is organized so that groups of workers undertake complete units of work. So instead of working individually, you put them in team to help them work in a better way. Delegation and empowerment. We already talked about delegation before, for when the manager gives another person the power to be in his position. And empowerment is the same thing as delegation. I've already talked about job enrichment, so it's just talking more detailed here, which the things that I just explained. Same thing at team working. You'd see the advantages and disadvantages here. I don't need to mention them; they're quite explicit. Finally, we're going to be talking about evaluation of financial and non-financial motivational methods. Okay. So number one, cultural differences and reward system. I just want to mention that not every culture has the same reward system, or applies, although we have a general and common uh, you know uh, definition and concept of motivation. We have different cultures around the world, and the type of motivation, let's say you want to motivate a Bahraini, you give him something different than motivating a, let's say, an American citizen. So it's basically different from one country to another. The way we're motivated is different. Performance orientation, same thing. Basically, um, let me mm, let me think of something here. So, moving on to performance orientation, what do I mean by that? It's basically um, how the extent to which in performance improvements, innovation is actually encouraged at that place. Okay. Future orientation is basically, the degree to which individuals are focused on delaying immediate reward and engaging in future oriented behaviors, like let's say planning, investing for the future. And then we go to institutional collectivism, which is basically it's which organizations, where organization reward or encourage the distribution of resources to groups. They focus on collective actions. They focus on more of a group work rather than individual work. Then we have fringe benefits and cultural differences. I already talked about it. So it's just, we're talking about any reward system that's given, depends on the type of culture as well. Okay. A program should have local feel, What do I mean by that? It's just that it's important to understand that every employee is different than the other. Okay, so basically and at the same time you should understand the local culture, the local feel of how people are motivated, and that, you know, a community and so on, to be able to provide those incentives. And then we have local distribution of rewards. Okay, local distribution of rewards, same thing, similar to the point that I just mentioned. And finally, cultural differences with non-financial rewards is basically what I mentioned earlier, of having, you know, different cultures. And here it comes to non-financial rewards. Maybe a non-financial reward to American citizen would be, you know, I don't know, a pat in the back, but here it would be, let's say, something completely different. So it depends on the culture, depends on the vision and mission that the company is following, and so on. So, which by we have finished 2.4. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions if you have, and good luck.